Well, we know the story from here. Double Lift switches teams. They make playoffs. They eliminate Cloud9, and now TSM are going to Worlds. Spring split didn't matter.
Nope.
Some might even say that it is embarrassing that Cloud9, who dominated pretty much all of the entire season, do not have the opportunity to go to Worlds and rebound from a half a month's worth of poor performances. Now we find ourselves in a situation where they are on the outside looking in, and Double Lift and his team are going to Worlds. Taking nothing away from that accomplishment, let's talk about the format itself. Spring split didn't matter. Double Lift got the final say, the last laugh. TSM going to Worlds. To me, Jacob, I find it unfortunate. This is almost a nightmare scenario for this format for the LCS, because for me, it's almost as if it has to change next season.
I mean, I think I have a couple of different opinions here, in the sense that, like, if the spring split doesn't matter, then test out your academy talent, right? Like, try to develop that way. Like, that's the one thing all of North America has not done well, is invest in young talent. Generally, Tactical and Johnson are... Actually, Tactical is probably the only real example of this. I say that because they didn't even... Like, they wanted Johnson, but they didn't want to play with him forever. If you remember, they were trying to get sneaky at the time. So, like, he wasn't, like, Dignitas's first choice in the way that Tactical was Liquid's first choice once Double Lift pieced out. But, yeah, like, if it doesn't matter, then invest in your talent and don't care so much about winning. But this brings me back to exactly what I've talked about on this show before, that, like, most esports teams can't make money unless they win. Right, like, they have nothing that makes them interesting unless they're a winning team, and so in that way, spring split matters. But in terms of the actual competition, Worlds qualification, and everything else, it doesn't. Yeah, it makes me upset that it doesn't. I didn't like the change when they announced that spring split didn't have championship points or anything attached to it. Because I think you should have to be one of the best teams all year to be able to go to the World Championship. I think you have to, like, being able to play the whole year. It should be the thing. The only like, unless every single region would change to an open tournament format in a post-COVID world where everyone's traveling and playing each other more frequently, which isn't going to happen, by the way.
No.
But unless
it would, but it never will because of LPL.
Yeah. If that happened, we're having a different conversation here, but it's not going to happen, and therefore we are in this situation. But NA teams, if you're listening, play your academy players next year if the format's the same. Please, let them get some reps.
Believe, and I've said this to friends off camera, and I've said it to you guys off camera, I can't believe LPL ended up having the best qualification format for Worlds after having some of the worst qualifications for Worlds. They were outdone, in my opinion, by the issues that the LCK had this past week, which was unfortunate. And again, like, that's more due to COVID concerns than, you know, having to hotfix Skarner in a patch that qualified an IG team that probably shouldn't have gone in 2015. Or having to play like some ridiculous like 7 best of 5s back to back to back. Those have all been in previous LPL formats, but I think LPL across the board was the region that qualified the teams that had been at the top of their region in TES and JDG in a really fair way, where summer is still weighted very heavily. Because summer should matter more than spring in terms of Worlds qualification. Otherwise, we get into another Najin Blacksword thing. But I do think, and I know we'll talk about Rogue, because obviously they looked a lot better in their series against Mad Lions than they did in their first playoff series. But I still do think that you should not be able to qualify based on your spring points to the Worlds for like a world championship. That was my issue with Rogue. Not that I was dunking on them for being bad. They obviously made adjustments from their first series to their second, and they looked significantly better. I think the big thing with them qualifying early is that they qualified based on the spring points that they made, to the point where people, like, players were actually asking me why players in NA were asking me why Rogue had qualified based on championship points. So I think, like, NA went one way and LEC went another way, and I feel like they could definitely meet in the middle in terms of looking at how points are weighted. I think spring split should count for something. It's particularly egregious this year because we didn't have an MSI, right? Like the only like international competition we had was MSC between the South Korean and Chinese teams. But I think for across the board, outside of like hiccups with LCK, they're probably like second in terms of qualifying what teams gave like the best. But then you also have T1 who might not make it, and they were spring champions, so that's another thing to consider. You have, and we had talked about this previously with G2 and Fnatic, like, are they going to heat up after having really rough regular seasons? And the answer is obviously yes. Like, these two are still at the top of Europe. They both came out and had convincing playoff performances. So I think spring split should matter. I don't think it should have 0 points like it did in North America, because I think it leads to a lot of stagnation, players not caring, organizations not caring, and not caring in a way that, to wrap all the way back around to Jacob's point, doesn't have them test out their own talent, which, like, if spring split doesn't matter, like, why not? Especially right now, and they might not have known this at the very beginning of spring split, but right now you might not have the option to get that sweet South Korean or European player that you want because of visa issues or because they don't want to leave because the US has dealt with COVID really terribly. And you might only have North American talent to look at. And now you haven't really scouted these players. You haven't really tested them out in anything beyond academy. So I think spring split should matter. I also think that another team that's really happy about this is TL, for obvious reasons, again, that were beyond their control because it was visa issues. It wasn't like necessarily players not caring, although Doublelift was also on that team before Tactical started.
I hate the spring split, Arda. All my homies hate the spring split. The spring split sucks. I wish it was abolished. I wish it was eradicated. I hate the spring split. I don't like the new playoff. I don't like the new playoff formats in Europe or North America. I think they take away from the actual championship. I feel like the championships have been diluted in both North America and Europe, with the qualification for Worlds being the number one thing over the championship. More people care about who's qualifying for Worlds than who's actually going to raise the domestic trophy, which I think is a step backwards of everything Riot always preached about making their titles prestigious. I do think that the lack of playing arenas does take away from that as well. So maybe in a post-COVID world where we're having these finals in 15,000 seat arenas, it'll feel more special and it'll feel more important to win a title over just making Worlds. But the reason why none of this is going to change, and the reason why Riot's probably going to laugh at us talking about all this, is because sponsorships are up, numbers are way up across the board. People are 500,000 plus watching TL versus TSM, or Cloud9 versus TSM. 800,000 plus watching Fnatic versus G2. Like, the numbers on every single region are way through the roof. It doesn't matter if it's North America, Korea, China. In terms of just the Twitch viewership, the YouTube viewership, the Western viewership, and I'm sure China viewership is also just going way up because that's all that China knows how to do when it comes to League of Legends, is just continue growing. It's all going well. And with other esports, we're saying, and you would say, oh, it's the COVID effect. Like, everyone's home, everyone's watching, Twitch. That must mean, like, it has to be a recurring thing, right? No, some other esports are down. We're seeing lesser numbers across the board, and with a lot of other esports, where for League of Legends, it just keeps growing. And we can talk all day about how, spring split sucks. I wish we could go to an open circuit. I wish the summer split mattered more than actually qualifying for Worlds. But if you're Riot and you're saying, oh, hey, we just got McDonald's and LCK sponsorship. Oh, man, we're getting 900,000 plus for a G2 Fnatic series. Like, oh, man, people actually care about NA still? Like, oh, man, there's no reason to change because they just continue bringing viewers. People, obviously, we're the minority here because people are tuning in. People are excited about these new format changes. And spring, even though it doesn't matter necessarily, people are always going to tune into spring because it's the new lineups, right? It's like, oh, man, I can't wait to see Chovy on this team or Naguri on this team. Oh, man, there's always that thing of the spring split always usually generally gets more viewers than summer because people are more excited at the beginning of the year because it's always the newness, the freshness of having a new year upon us. And I think this year has been one of the years, amazingly, where the summer split has just been way up in terms of viewership. And I think if you're right, you're ecstatic about how everything is going. Every number, every metric seems to be on the way up, where your competitors have no clue what they're doing. And a lot of them just quit during the COVID era. So I hate the spring split. All my homies do, but the 800,000 people watching G2 versus Fnatic obviously don't care that the spring split doesn't matter. So